introduce our guest speaker for the last panel entitled Challenges in the Power Sector. We would like to call on stage the Director for the Australian-New Zealand Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, Ms. Cielo Narvaez.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I hope that you've been enjoying our annual Arangkada event. My name is Cielo Narvaez. I am one of the board of directors of the Australian-New Zealand Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines. ANSCHM has been in the Philippines since 1974. Our mission is to be an effective organization that visibly supports business and trade relations between Australia, New Zealand, and the Philippines. We have over 350 members as of October 2019, and we are very proud to be part of the Joint Foreign Chambers. Now, my day job is I am the Country Operations Manager of Telstra. We have been in the Philippines for about a decade, providing connectivity services to large enterprises and multinational companies. The Philippines is also a customer service hub for Telstra, where we have invested in world-class facilities and talent to serve our customers. Panel 3 will focus on challenges in the power sector and will discuss our new policy brief, Power. This is the first time we have prepared a policy brief on power, although the sector was analyzed with recommendations in the original Arangkada book in December 2010. Since then, the Philippine GDP has increased by 80% and the population by 14 million. Clearly, the demand for power is increasing strongly, but it seems that supply is not keeping up. This year saw a record number of yellow and red alerts nationally. Power is not an easy subject to understand. It is technical. But as the Philippines soon become an upper middle income economy, and continues its high rate of economic growth, the economy will need dependable power at a lower cost in a competitive marketplace. And the country's generation mix should continue to make a minimum contribution to global warming. I wish to thank the two authors of the policy brief, Mr. Nonoy Oplas and Mr. Lawrence de la Cruz, who have done, Mr. Round of applause, please. Who have done outstanding work, guided by Attorney Jocot de Dios, Chairman of the AmCham Energy Committee. These gentlemen who are all with us today have produced a strong analysis with balanced and meaningful recommendations. Sarah Gomez also drafted the section on electric vehicles. Our speaker for the panel is Undersecretary Jess Posadas, in place of Energy Secretary Husi, who hoped to speak with us today. Yusek Posadas has spent most of his career in the private sector and in power. He joined the DOE in 2016 as Senior Undersecretary. Following his remarks, Yusek Posadas will join the panel. The panel moderator is former DOE Undersecretary Jocot de Dios. Joining them on the panel are four of the top senior power executives in the Philippines: Mr. Rhea Espinosa, Attorney Jay Layug, Mr. Giles Puno, and Mr. Manny Rubio. Please look into your delegate handbook and you will see that these gentlemen include the current heads of Meralco, First Gen, and Aboitiz Power, and the former chairman of the National Renewable Energy Board. Please get set for an exciting and informative discussion with the energetic leaders of the Philippine power sector. More power to us. Mr. Undersecretary, I invite you to the podium.
My job here is to read the message of our dear Secretary Alfonso G. Cusi. Distinguished guests and participants to this conference, I'm very pleased to be here today for the 8th Arangkada Philippines Anniversary Forum. And on behalf of Secretary Alfonso G. Cusi, we would like to sincerely thank the American Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines for making the Department of Energy a part of this event. Energy is the prime mover of the economy, and it is inherently essential for economic development. A balance between energy usage and environmental protection must be pursued with sustainable economic progress and inclusive sustainable industrialization. Recognizing these realities, the DOE is continuously seeking all possible sources to ensure that the country has sufficient, secure, and sustainable power supply to meet the growing demand for power. Let me then share with you the country's current power landscape, as well as the efforts to ensure the efficient use of energy in the country. The DOE remains committed to putting the Philippine consumer first. Guided by the EPIRA law, we believe that consumers can be empowered by ensuring a transparent, competitive, and rules-based energy market. Indeed, as we continue to empower consumers through appropriate policies or reforms, we must be mindful that energy must be accessible to all Filipinos, from the smallest sitios to the most densely populated cities. Access doesn't just mean being able to flick a light switch whenever you want. It also means being able to afford the energy you need. At the same time, it is important we aren't just implementing stopgap solutions. Our priorities must take into consideration the long-term energy security of our country. We need dependable and diverse energy resources. Finally, we are no strangers to the risks from climate change. We are aware for the need for action. That is why we must continue to invest and encourage innovation in energy solutions which are both financially and environmentally sustainable. In April earlier this year, President Duterte signed into law the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Law, which will institutionalize the practice of being energy efficient, from the operations of businesses to the evaluation of infrastructure project designs. Here, the government must be leading by example to the Government Energy Management Program, which will see energy efficiency and conservation initiatives being undertaken across all national government-owned facilities. 2 regulatory initiatives will be fast-tracked for implementation to support the continued growth of renewable energy in the Philippines. First is the Renewable Portfolio Standards, or RPS, a supply-side policy which will mandate distribution utilities to source a minimum portion of energy from renewable sources, thus guaranteeing a market for renewable energy generators. This minimum will be increased on a yearly basis by at least 1%. The second is the Green Energy Option Program, a demand-side policy which will empower consumers to choose the energy they consume is sourced from renewable resources. Once implemented, this will open new opportunities to promote the Philippines as an investment destination for environment-first manufacturing, where an entire supply chain can be powered by renewable energy. Additionally, the DOE has initiated a proposal to establish a green energy rate for 2,000 megawatts of new renewable energy generation capacity. The National Renewable Energy Board is expected to submit its recommendations in the months ahead. To be clear, the energy rate is not a feed-in tariff program and will not be subsidizing the energy generation sector. It will need to be competitive with current market rates. Instead, the green energy rate will support the RE generators with securing PSAs and selling their energy through the establishment of a fair baseline price. Many of you would have heard the President's call to fast-track the development of renewable energy sources during his fourth SONA last week. His comments highlight the significant role of renewable energy also plays in enhancing energy security for the Philippines. It is an important source of diversification, off-grid adaptable, and it is inherently indigenous. To provide you with a snapshot of the power sector, the country's total national peak demand for 2018 was recorded at 14,782 megawatts, which is 993 megawatts or 7.2 higher than the 13,789 megawatts recorded peak in 2017. The peak demand pertains to the demand to the time of day when the electricity consumption is at its highest. For power generation, this grew by 5.7%, reaching 99,765 gigawatt hours in 2018 from only 94,370 gigawatt hours in 2017. In terms of power supply for the total installed generating capacity, this grew by 4.8% from 22,278 megawatts in 2017 to 23,815 megawatts in 2018. Also, a total of 934 megawatts of new capacities were added to the country's supply in 2018, which includes coal-fired, oil-based, geothermal, hydropower, and biomass power plants. Coal dominates the generation mix, accounting for 52.1% of the mix. The increase in coal generation can be attributed to the entry of new coal-fired power plants. Generation from renewable energy technologies contributed 23.4%, while natural gas was at 21.4%. Oil-based technologies contributed to at least in the power mix of 3.2%. Coal accounts for the highest share of installed capacity at 37.1%, followed by oil-based at 18% and hydro at 15.5%. Dependable capacity, meanwhile, was 21,241 megawatts in 2018. Dependable capacity is defined as the maximum output that a power plant can provide under adverse conditions for specified periods of time and taking into consideration the plant's wear and tear condition. To address the increasing demand caused by economic development, DOE encourages the private sector to invest in the power generation to augment the existing capacity in the system. Committed power projects total 6,329 megawatts. About 80% of these projects are coal-fired plants that will provide the required baseload capacity in the system in the coming years. The indicative power projects in the country total 33,199 megawatts. Indicative projects mean that these are on pre-development stage and proponents have signified intentions to put up the power plants. Of the total indicative projects, 55% and 32% are coal-fired power projects. Based on the projections from the PDP or Power Development Plan 2018 to 2040, the Philippines will be needing a total capacity of addition of 43,765 megawatts within the planning period. To achieve a robust and vibrant economy with a reliable, secure, and affordable power, the DOE is relentlessly pursuing energy policies and initiatives that will strengthen the power sector. The DOE is currently working on the following policies: policy and grid operating program of power plants, continued implementation of the retail competition and open access, or ARCOA, which is covered by a TRO by the Supreme Court, evaluation of current market price caps, development of ancillary services to ensure sufficient operating reserves, especially during summer months, declaration of market intervention when yellow alert status consistently occurs in several trading intervals. This policy should mandate the system operator to automatically declare market intervention during red alert status. A cap on bilateral contracting. A study on an aggregated buyer system that still ensures competition in the power sector. As the Philippines continues its transition towards the cleaner energy future, conventional energy sources will play the role of bridging fuel that eases this process. With the Malampaya gas field nearing depletion, quick action must be taken to safeguard our energy security. In response to this, the DOE has initiated the legislation and framework to establish the Philippines as a Southeast Asian LNG hub. This plan, while ambitious, has been validated by the overwhelming interest we have received from global investors in a race to establish the first LNG hub in the Philippines. This LNG hub will serve the dual purpose of facilitating future LNG imports while taking advantage of drastic changes in the global LNG trade flows that has put the Philippines in the center of global LNG trade. The LNG hub will be a vital lever of economic growth for the Philippines, new jobs for engineering and technical professionals, to develop indigenous petroleum resources within undisputed Philippine sovereign territory, as well as promote investments in the upstream energy sector. Having adequate energy supply is one thing, but the reliability of our energy infrastructure is just as important. Many of us will remember the red and yellow alerts that occurred across central Luzon in April this year during the worst of the summer heat. The incident highlighted the need for better coordination and more robust reserves. On one hand, this means building capacity on the grid, as well as ensuring existing power plants adhere to the highest operations and maintenance standards, mitigating the risk of unplanned shutdowns. On another note, more plants on the grid alone will not solve the problem. Existing transmission bottlenecks prevent the dispatch of reserves from plants located in other regions. We need to invest in building more transmission lines to increase connectivity, creating a more resilient grid that Filipinos deserve. Additionally, the integrity of the grid must be secured through the provision of adequate ancillary reserves as stipulated in the Philippine Grid Code. Unfortunately, the DOE cannot do this alone. We don't have the mandate to build additional transmission lines and contract ancillary reserves. We need all our stakeholders working together and strictly adhering to their mandates. It will be the DOE's priority to ensure that the transmission development plan and the Philippine Grid Code are both strictly enforced. In support of that, we will be looking into the implementation of reserves market for ancillary services to ensure greater transparency and oversight of its procurement. To fulfill the vision of a strong unified electricity transmission network that will meet the country's increasing power needs, the DOE ensures that continuous transmission system upgrades and expansion projects are developed and commissioned on time to reliably and efficiently deliver electricity to its consumers. Shown on the slide are the priority projects for the development of new transmission backbones and island interconnections that are geared towards a unified Philippine grid system, which may someday be ready for interconnection to the future ASEAN power grid. Of course, ensuring access to reliable and sustainable energy for a nation of 7,000 islands is no small feat. However, since 2016, based on 2015 census, we have seen household electrification in the Philippines improve from 90% to above 95% in 2018. 95% is not ideal, but this is a work in progress, and we won't rest until Philippine household is electrified, whether grid-connected or off-grid basis. Every Filipino deserves to have access to basic electricity. And to give benefits to host communities of energy projects, we led the initiative that will see funds collected from the Energy Regulation number 1-94 program disbursed to tribal and indigenous communities for the implementation of social development programs, including electrification programs. Furthermore, earlier this year, the DOE established a task force to undertake an audit of all electric cooperatives to determine compliance levels with their service requirements. The objective of this exercise is simple. We want the electric cooperatives to serve the people better. If they are not up to task, we will provide assistance to underperforming electric cooperatives. If need be, however, we recommend for non-performing electric cooperatives opened for willing and able qualified third parties to provide the service. We are also encouraged by microgrid solutions, which opens opportunities to electricity off-grid and non-economically viable areas with affordable power without the need for government subsidies. The DOE will be working on reforms to ease the entry of qualified third parties to build, own, and operate microgrids in areas underserved and unserved by the electric cooperatives. Through increased competition, we hope to drive improved energy service for the underserved and unserved communities. It is true that the Philippines continues to be one of the highest electricity tariffs in the ASEAN region. High electricity bills are a constant complaint we often hear. For investments, this makes us less attractive as a destination of doing business. It means higher overheads of business. Of course, this doesn't paint a complete picture. Unlike some of our Asian neighbors, Filipinos pay the true cost of electricity. Electricity prices are kept artificially low by unsustainable subsidies. Despite it all, if you take a closer look, the annual inflation of electricity prices in the 5-year period from 2014 to 2018 is actually lower than the average annual inflation rate of the country. Therefore, real electricity prices are in fact on its way down. Over the last 3 years, we introduced a mandated competitive selection process for all power supply agreements, as well as the turnover of operations of our spot market, the WESM, to an independent market operator. We have also introduced the voluntary ARCOA for customers with monthly peak average demand of at least 750 kilowatts. Again, this seeks to empower the consumer by allowing them to choose from whom they buy their electricity, eliminating captive consumers from distribution units to pass on their generation charges. We have a long way to go before our energy prices are as competitive as our neighbors, but we believe that by operating a transparent and competitive energy market, we will be getting there. On August 8, 2019, President Duterte signed Republic Act 11371, or the Murang Kuryente Act. The law allows the use of government share from the Malampaya gas project, which is about 208 billion pesos, as payment for the stranded contract costs and stranded debts of the National Power Corporation. Before the implementation of this policy, the stranded contract costs and debts of NPC forms part of the universal charges that are passed on to consumers. Thus, payments of this debt for consumers. The benefits under ER 1-94 to host communities has been reformed with the issuance of policies that included indigenous people and communities as beneficiaries and improve administration of the funds. As part of the government's effort to ensure fair competition, prevent market abuses, and protect consumer welfare, the turnover of the wholesale electricity spot market to the Independent Electricity Market Operator of the Philippines has been achieved recently. Another new policy we've initiated is Department Circular DC 2019-05008, which was approved on May 28, 2019. Said circular calls for the itemization of fuel price components. As such, it requires all oil firms to submit reports on its segregated price components, including details on profit margin. This, however, has become a subject of a court case, barring the DOE from further moving forward on said matter. On June 28, 2017, President Duterte signed Executive Order Number 30, entitled Creating the Energy Investment Coordinating Council to streamline the regulatory procedures affecting energy projects. The DOE, as Chair and Secretariat of the EICC, is tasked to ensure the efficient and effective implementation of energy agencies are now required to act on major energy project applications within a 30 As of 20 November 2019, we have issued certifications to 144 projects of energy projects of national significance with potential investment of 678 billion pesos. RA 11234, or the Energy Virtual One-Stop Shop, was signed into law by the President last March 2019, mandating the creation of an online platform which would facilitate the paperless applications for permits of new power generation, transmission, and distribution projects. The law also calls for a simplified and fast permitting process that will cut red tape in the energy sector. In closing, I would like to reiterate what Secretary Cusi always says, that shaping meaningful policies will require both the public and private sectors working together. Cognizant of the Filipinos' continuing aspiration for a matatag, maginhawa at panatag na buhay, translated as his longing for a deeply rooted, comfortable, and secure life. Thank you, and mabuhay tayong lahat.
Thank you very much, Yusek Posadas. Kindly stay on stage to join the panel discussion. I would like to call on the moderator of this panel, the chair of the Energy and Power Committee of the American Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines Incorporated, and the CEO of GE Philippines, Attorney Jose Victor Emmanuel de Dios. Joining him is our first panelist, the President and CEO of Meralco, Attorney Ray Espinosa. Next up, we have the senior partner of Puno and Puno Law and former chairman of the National Renewable Energy Board, Attorney Jose Layog Jr. Our third panelist is the President and CEO of First Gen Corporation, Mr. Francis Giles Puno. our panel for this afternoon. Let's please call on stage the EVP and COO of Aboitiz Power Corporation, Mr. Emmanuel Rubio.
Hello, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our little panel discussion. Actually, it's going to be a continuation of the small huddle we had over the real panel discussion. Hopefully, it spills over to the next 40 minutes. Thank you, Yusek Posadas, for that presentation. I couldn't help but pay attention to some of the initiatives that the Department of Energy has undertaken. And obviously, as we're trying to work out a policy paper that has its own set of recommendations and conclusions, I think the approach is a little different in the sense that we try to put it in context with respect to our neighbors in ASEAN. So I'll stop there, and I'd like to pass it on to the members of the panel for some statements. And I'd like to start with Yusek J. Layug, because he has a prepared presentation. Then we continue on. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, Johot. Good afternoon, everyone. It's indeed an honor to be amidst these gentlemen. I have to admit, I'm not the wisest, but I am the youngest, in the crowd. So, anyway, good afternoon. We've had some power already, but I'd like to show a few slides just to provide a context on what we will be discussing today. Next slide. All right, next slide, please. Earlier, Yusek Posadas already provided the supply and production and outlook, the demand profile for the Philippines. For the entire Philippines, you will note in his earlier presentation that by 2040, we would need about 43,000 megawatts. Next slide. In the Philippines. So this is the total capacity needed by 2040. Next slide. And for every region, they provided the numbers as well. Luzon at 24,385. Visayas, next slide, at 9,180 megawatts. And Mindanao. Next slide. At 10,200 megawatts. So the data indicates that Philippines indeed is a growing economy. And at 4.6 projection, demand growth, we anticipate that indeed a lot of capacities would be needed to meet the demand of the consumers. Next slide. Now, let me show you, because I am an advocate of renewable energy, what has happened over time. Since 2012, when we passed a few of these regulations. Next slide. This is the National Renewable Energy Program that we launched way back in 2011. You will note that that year, we had about 5,369 megawatts installed capacity. And we said that by 2030, with a target of 35% in the power mix, we want 15,236 megawatts of renewable energy by 2030. Next slide. But I guess what has happened since 2012 and since the time we launched the National Renewable Energy Program? Not much has been built, unfortunately. You will note that only 1,043 megawatts were provided FIT eligibility and were built for a period of 4 years under different technologies. So you had 525 megawatts for solar, you had 400 megawatts for wind, 98 megawatts for biomass, and a very little 40 megawatts for hydro. These plants were given 40 to 60. Now, these plants were given FIT eligibility by the DOE in 2016. Now, unfortunately, there were also around 300 megawatts of solar farms that did not qualify for FIT, so we called them stranded, and they sell in the spot market. Now, in 2018, the RPS was signed by the DOE, and we noticed that a few of the utilities have started negotiating PSAs. So some of them are under construction, but not much, no, despite the RPS. Next slide. These numbers show you what FIT rates have been granted by the DOE. Currently, the DOE extended the FIT for biomass until December 31, 2019, and we are hoping that they will resolve the problem because there are more than 250 megawatts building, and unfortunately, most of them are in the Negros region, where we all know the Cebu-Negros Panay line is still being upgraded. So while there are new capacities being built, unfortunately, they're not being fired up. On the other hand, HydroFit, as I announced earlier in the powwow, has been extended by the Secretary without any timeline, provided the 250 megawatt installed target is met. So that gives a lot of the run-of-river hydro players more time to finish their projects. WindFit is already finished, and also at the same time, SolarFit is already gone. So with that, we move on to the next phase of policy change at the DOE. Next slide. Where from 2016 to 2017, all the way up to January 2018, where I agreed to act as chairman of the National Renewable Energy Board with a specific target of finishing all the rules. We fortunately at the NREB passed all these rules which we endorsed to the Department of Energy. Luckily, next slide, the RPS on all grid areas rules were approved by the DOE effective as of January 2018. In short, all utilities and cooperatives and mandated participants must sign renewable energy power plant supply agreements, failing which you only go to jail for 5 years. I usually don't get any laughs when I announce that before the co-ops. They get scared, no? But that is in the law, by the way. Not only is the RPS rules for on-grid was signed, next slide, there was also the RPS for off-grid. As we all know, you and I provide for subsidies in the off-grid areas. We want to reduce that. And I think the DOE also wants to reduce the subsidy. And the way to do it is to install hybrid systems where solar or other renewable energy resources can also be used. So the RPS for off-grid rules were also approved by the DOE in 2018. Next slide. And of course, another major important RE mechanism approved by the DOE is the Green Energy Option Program, the GEOP. What does this mean? For if you are a customer who wants to sign up directly with the power supplier running on renewable energy, you can do that. In fact, unlike in the ARCOA, where the threshold is 1 megawatt, we have reduced the threshold for GEOP to 100 kilowatt, subject to certain parameters provided in the rules. Next slide. And hopefully, in the next 2 months before the year ends, because we have endorsed the RE market rules to the DOE way back in July of 2017, hopefully they will issue the RE market rules. Why is this very important? This serves as the platform for trading of your RE certificates. So for every 1 megawatt hour of RE generated, PEMC or IMAP will come up with a certificate that can be traded in the market. These certificates can be used by the mandated participants as their form of compliance, i.e., your escape from jail. Because if you have the RE certificates and you fail to sign a PSA, then you will not be liable to the RPS violation. Next slide. Now, what does the future hold? Next slide. Please note that while there are almost 6,000 megawatts of RE already installed, if you look at the potential capacity in the Philippines, there are a total of 23,000 megawatts. Still a lot of room to build in the renewable energy sector. Next slide. And when we talk about future, the rules already provide for the market. As I had mentioned, we have the RPS, where a lot of the utilities and the co-ops now currently are negotiating for PSAs. We have the Green Energy Option Program. A lot of those hotels, schools, And major manufacturing companies have been signing up as well with the retail electricity suppliers. You have the ARCOA as well, and of course, the wholesale electricity spot market. Lately, we have seen also the ancillary services. Next slide. Now, the future would be brighter if the government, of course, would help all the private sector players. If you will note in this slide, in the alphabet from A to Z, there is a government agency involved. You need to get 200 permits. So with that, hopefully we can discuss all the issues, and thank you for this opportunity to explain the power market.
Thank you, Jay. Thanks very much. So I'll move right straight away to Manny. Comments, reactions, or statement from your side.
Thank you, Jokot. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this forum. I'd like to congratulate and commend the authors of the paper. No? The papers gives us a very factual, real, and unbiased situation of the power industry in the country. I see all the recommendations, something that we agree with, and we support the conclusion that the paper actually came up with. I'd like to raise 3 points, or highlight 3 points that the paper actually touched upon already. There's a discussion in one of the sections about having the optimum mix of or capacity for energy. Any oversupply is inefficient, or undersupply, of course, is obviously also inefficient. No? That's why we have been pushing for the co-optimized market to start. No? Yellow alerts has always been something that of an irritant to DOE, especially when you see the reports in the newspapers. So there has to be enough reserves, and I think to bring that capacity out, the co-optimized market should be encouraged, and it has to start, and that it has to be priced optimally with energy, so that you can really see the balance. No? And then at the end, when we talk about energy, it's always the focal point is always generation capacity. We tend to forget about transmission, no? And I'm sure my colleagues here who are in the generation business would agree with me that supply is not just capacity that we generate from our plants, no? But the issue really is, can we actually evacuate the capacity that we're producing? No? Do we have the capacity in the transmission grid to evacuate the capacity of the plants that we're building? We have congestions across the country, and that's something that we've been working with DOE and GCP, of course, to make sure that the demand is actually met, no? Not just by having enough capacity, but also enough capacity that can be distributed and delivered to the consumers.
Thank you, Manny. Over to Giles.
Good afternoon. So I'll just get straight to it. As far as I was reviewing the report, and for all of you who have not gotten the chance to review the report, I think it's a good read as far as an assessment of the power industry, some of the issues it faces, but generally it's a positive view on the Philippine power industry, that it has a future. But the devil's in the details, and my immediate response was really, how do you operationalize all these recommendations? And there seems to obviously be a lot of work ahead of us. But having the recommendations is a good start. The question is really, how do we get the stakeholders to meet and say, let's get moving with it? No? We were talking to Jokot earlier, and I was talking about the tracking of carbon of power demand with economic growth. And I was telling him that just not long ago, there was a Bloomberg report about essentially a moving away of that corollary. There was tracking of a chart where if you had power growth, you had economic growth. But that report was quite interesting in the sense that suddenly you see this gap widen, where economic growth was growing despite the fact that power growth was not as growing at the same clip. And I thought that was good for a country like the Philippines because obviously in our case, we don't have a lot of heavy industries. We don't have a lot of power-intensive industries. But there is a lot of interest, for example, in manufacturing. There's a lot of interest in the service sector. And so I think we have to really create a sort of a bespoke model for the Philippines that allows us to capture value for the country moving forward and have a proper plan for new capacity to be built. And with respect to that, as you probably all know, I represent a company called First Gen, and in our case, our strategy is really lead in the decarbonization of the Philippine energy system. And clearly, as Yusek Posadas presented, there's a lot of power plants around. There are a lot of coal-fired power plants around. But our view is that given the issues on climate change, given the issues of sustainability, we are of the view that in the future, moving forward, we really have to think about how we slow down the burning of fossil fuel. And that really requires not only support from private sector, but I think more importantly, government has to effectively lead the way in creating a dynamic environment for that to happen. You already see it in many other countries where they're in fact drawing the line on when they'll say beyond this date, no more coal-fired plants. But it's difficult for private sector essentially to move forward because obviously they have a mandate to deliver additional capacity. But at the same time, have government take a position that they're sort of indifferent on where these capacities come, as long as it's low cost. And then we'll have to go through a whole argument about low cost. And my argument is that when you have legacy, when you sign up for a new coal-fired plant today, you're burdening the consumers in the long term with a huge capital cost recovery. That if you made a mistake, then actually that's a mistake that's quite painful. And our argument in favor of gas is that the capacity cost is actually lower on gas. The variable cost is probably higher. And so the question is really, how do you strike the balance between all of these, what could be legacy agreements? And so there's a lot of work that we have in front of us. There was a comment here about third-party access to LNG terminals. I just wanted to assure the stakeholders that as we plan and develop our LNG terminal itself, we've never envisioned it to be a sole use asset for First Gen. In fact, as you all know, basic economics will tell you that the more volume pushes through, then that would translate into lower cost of the regasification fee. And so we are in favor of opening up the terminal to third-party usage. And the question really is, what's the mechanism for that to happen? Or is it our responsibility to build excess capacity upfront? That's also quite painful for the private sector. Unless another private sector or other parties say, okay, I'll sign up for capacity upfront and give you the corresponding capital to enable you to build up more than what your requirement is. So just a few of the comments that I had on the report.
Thanks, Giles and Manny. So now we go to the wire side of it, which is agnostic, technology agnostic. Give your own set of views.
Well, from a distribution utility standpoint, I personally would not want to be agnostic. I think it's important, even from a distribution utility standpoint, to be able to see clearly the necessary or appropriate energy mix for the country. As Giles pointed out earlier, I mean, the writing is on the wall. It's happening around the world. There's a shift from heightened carbon to lesser carbon, and eventually over to renewables, where carbon is no longer an issue. But private sector cannot drive that shift. It has to be actually led by the government through the necessary policy. More so in the Philippines because we are basically searching for gas, and it seems that there is gas in the West Philippine Sea, and hopefully that will be tapped soon. Now, given that we have that kind of indigenous resource, it is still fossil-based, but it's less pollutive than coal. I've always espoused that the government should actually take a policy position already in terms of developing a gas market in the Philippines and promoting gas. That way, the signal to the private sector, even to the utility and to the power generators, becomes more clear. It's difficult for the DU to become simply indifferent, which we are required today, because the sole determinant in sourcing supply for the distribution utility is cost. We are required to source power at the least cost. So when gas competes with coal, at least today, coal is still more competitive than gas, but it has these attendant issues that involve the environment. Of course, when we move to gas, the question obviously will be one of price or cost. But in my own view, if we really honestly want to protect the environment, we have to pay a premium for it. And we have to pay a price to protect the environment. And that's something that only policy of government or legislation can actually effectively impose on us. Because as consumers, we always want the cheapest cost, but that's not necessarily the better form of fuel. The other concern for the DU is actually supply. Around 80% of the supply of Meralco today is being sourced from power plants that are at least on average 17 years old. So there is a dire need to actually build new capacities and hopefully with more efficient technology. And that's why the CSP becomes very important for us. And the way we view CSP is we need an orderly and a more systematic way of sourcing power on a competitive basis such that we are able to allocate reasonably capacities that we have to source from existing or brownfield plants, regardless of their age, and then capacities that are effectively reserved for newer plants or new builds. It's hard not to do it that way because in the end we have to be sure that the sourcing of our power results in reliable and affordable power for us. As we all know, the older the plant, the more unreliable it becomes, the frequency of outages, and we have seen that happen just in the last 2 years. The prevalence of these yellow and red alerts are actually traced to basically the outages of the power plants. And most of them actually are because of age, not necessarily just maintenance, but age. So that's very important for distribution utility because we get the brunt of the outrage if there is a brownout or a blackout when basically we're not after the generators, we're just sourcing power. So it behooves us also to make sure that when we source power, we can confidently say that the power we're sourcing is reliable, and it is efficient, and it is affordable. So those are actually statutory or legal obligations imposed on distribution utilities.
Thank you. A lot of interesting points. So for the purposes of, encouraging a little bit of discussion, let me try to cite 3 points that each of you raised together with Jay as well. No, I guess optimizing the market. I noticed Yusek Posadas, DOE likes to cite installed and dependable, but actually what is relevant is available. And even if you say, in fact, we had this debate earlier on, several months ago as we were doing the round discussions, consultations, is there an oversupply situation or are we in a tight market? The fact that we have yellow and red alerts more in this year than the last 2 or 3 years flies in the face of any assertion that there's potentially oversupply. Or maybe the system is not optimized, goes to the point of Ray. About more than 60% of our power generation is 16 years and older. It's an ERC finding. So your outages, and you only suffer this during the summer months, is higher. In fact, our forced outage rates, which is a metric to measure how well you maintain your generation fleet in the Philippines, is far off, let's say, North American standards is what we could find. So that's something to think about in terms of how to deal with an aging fleet, optimizing. And that brings to the question, having more generation. And I think, to Gael's point, how to execute. There are nice policies, nice things to talk about, but at the end of the day, if you do not execute, then we just talk about them. We've been talking about the permits that Jay has been mentioning for the last several months, years. And it's still an issue, I know, with their RE developers. You know, there are hundreds of signatures that you need to get. And I think in a sector as critical as this, you need to really trim the fat and try to be as efficient. Economic development versus electricity consumption. There was that section in the policy paper that strives to see the correlation. And I think rather than belabor whether one affects the other, and I'm sure there has to be some effect, I think the thinking is how do we ensure better growth to spur economic growth. There's a, and this was in the paper, there was a transmission, it was a transmission issue, not so much a generation issue, interconnection with Boracay. And you saw the number there, just tourism revenues alone in the last 7 to 10 years grew about tenfold. So certainly domestically, there has to be a positive reinforcement in terms of an improved and more efficient system, whether it's generation that increase electricity consumption or even a transmission grid. So any reactions or thoughts, Yusek?
Well, with regard to the forecast, in fact, the forecast that we did up to 2040 really starts off with available capacity, because precisely we were of the view that we should not be looking at installed or dependable, but actually available. In our calculation, available capacity is 70% of installed capacity.
Yeah.
Dependable is 90% of installed capacity. So precisely we started with a available capacity as the starting point for that one. Now, with regard to delinking consumption with GDP, I think it's pleasant to inform that the signing of the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Act, in fact, supports that delinking. If energy intensity as the measure, which is consumption over GDP, actually it's a focus of within the ASEAN member states, that we are now looking at energy intensity as a measurement. So the other issue that I would like to take up is this issue of reserves, because really these yellow and red alerts are really a result of low reserves. And when you talk of reserves, both transmission and distribution are affected, because it has to be stated that much is to be deserved, much is to be expected out of our transmission operator. In fact, we are now seriously looking of being more serious in expecting them to do their job. So, because really they have to come up with the reserves which serves the 5 types of reserves. The regulating reserve, which is supposed to be 4% of total peak demand. Number 2 is contingency reserve. If one breaks down, actually it's the highest or the biggest generation unit. They have to have that. The second one is the dispatchable, which is supposed to be equivalent to the contingency. Then you have to have the reactive power reserve. Then you have to have the black start. In other words, when everything is zero or no electricity, there should be a capacity that would jumpstart the whole system. So, but these are not being complied with. That's why we are now very serious in looking at making do their mandate, their obligation, because this is now an issue of public interest. So, again, on the distribution side, we have we appreciate that they now see the importance of replacement power, because that has always been our issue. That whenever there is a PSA, there should be an amount that is supposed to cover for outages, be it planned outages, planned maintenance outages, or unplanned maintenance outages, or forced outages. This has to be covered with replacement power. Whether it's the GENCO side or the distribution side, whatever it is, it has to be covered. So, that's why we always say that we have to have replacement power or reserves. And if you want to quantify it, it's so easy. You just divide GDP over total gigawatt hours. That's the cost of an outage upon 1 hour. And then you compare it to capacity fee, which is supposed to match that. It's a no-brainer that you have to have reserves or replacement power. In fact, I keep on complaining that apparently consumers do not understand that there's a cost to reliable power, and that the cost of no power is higher than the cost of capacity fee. So, I think, and consumers must realize that we have all been misled of this notion that you don't pay for power if there is no power plant operating. There has to be a standby power, and you have to pay for it, even if it's not operating. So this mindset has to change, that you have to pay for capacities on reserve. So, yeah, I think that's...
Thank you, Secretary. Yeah, Manny?
Thanks, Jokot. I'd just like to echo what the Undersecretary just mentioned. No? Especially on the reserves, the way we're providing capacity for reserves today, there's really no plant that's built specifically to provide reserves. Most of all the plants, right, are actually built to provide energy or to meet a certain energy demand. That's why energy is only the leading utility in terms of capacity, in terms of supply and demand, right? Everything's lagging, but energy is still leading in most places, right? But the way reserves are being bought or provided, it's being carved out of the plants that are built and sized to provide energy. So if you take that small quantities, as you mentioned, CR is like 647 megawatts, which is the largest running unit. So from a facility, say you build a 300 megawatt plant, then it will qualify to provide ancillary. Then you take out 30 or 60 megawatts out of that. Then that plant is short to provide energy already. So it's always a catch-up game. So there has to be a policy or a rule that ancillary services should also be forward contracted, right? There has to be a rule that NGCP should be allowed to contract a plant forward, because now NGCP is contracting plants that are existing and qualified to provide the plant and only when it passes the test, right, sir? So then if that's the situation, we will always be lagging in terms of providing services. And we talked about supply and having the right amount. to me, as a generator representing Aboitiz Power, three things are certain, right? Climate change is upon us. EPIRA is working, and the climate is going to be more competitive as we move forward, right? Prices are really going down, and as a generator, that's something that we have to live with, and we're happy that the law is really working, especially for those getting power because you're in open access. But supply should also meet the demand, right? So there has to be balance. The supply should be reliable, of course, as Ray mentioned, should be affordable, and at the end of the day, sustainable as well. But the demand has to be met with supply, and that one that balance has always have to be considered at the end.
Jay, you want to say something?
I just wanted to say we wouldn't be talking about reserves if it's easy to build power plants in the first place. 2 years ago, there was a process conducted by Meralco for a wind energy farm. And unfortunately, the DOE was not sure of whether it will allow an unsolicited proposal or not. And that issue has lingered until now, until I saw a letter recently signed by the secretary to the DOE. So 2 years ago, and to build a wind farm, EDC being the biggest, will only take 18 months. So we probably would have a new wind farm today. NCIP, it takes forever to get the consent. Believe me, I can go A to Z with the government agency. But I guess we wouldn't be talking about reserves if only it was easy for you to build the power plants. And that's what the private sector wants. It's not now a problem to build capacities because the renewable energy plants can be constructed in very short time, unlike coal plants. Solar farm can be built between 6 to 9 months, wind farm 18 months, biomass at most 2 years. So it's not easy, but we hope that the government will make it easier for the private sector to build those power plants. It doesn't have to take 200 permits. The good thing about the Philippines, there are so many lawyers, but at the same time, that's also a bad thing. We have so many laws, doing business law. No, he's become a businessman. But we have so many laws. We wrote a lot of laws, but we're very bad in implementation and execution. The EPIRA law was passed in 2001. Until now, it's not fully implemented. The RE law was passed in 2008, still not implemented fully. And now we just passed the Energy Efficiency Act. I'm sure it will not be implemented in the next 8 years. Someone was asking about the IRR. Maybe Yusek Posadas can answer that. Again, we just want government to make it easier for the private sector. The private sector will build if the government will help.
Yeah, okay. Let me respond to that because precisely the president is really looking at this very carefully. In fact, as you might have known, one of the first things he issued is the EO30. And he mandates that if an agency accepts complete documentation, he only gives that particular agency 30 days to act on it, whether deny or approve, but not to sit on it. In fact, he has called an undersecretary and fired him on the spot for not acting. So, I think this is a president that really hates queuing. He really hates queuing. So, I think that's one of the things that we have to give this administration, that precisely they would really like, this administration would really like to see investments come in. So, and then in fact, one of the new laws that he has also signed is the Energy Virtual One-Stop Shop, EVOS. Again, this is supposed to be an online thing, and he wants all of these applications, permits, being measured as to time, and he wants this to be online. In fact, the investment promotions of our Investments Promotion Officer, who's in charge of making this happen, is here today. And she knows that this is a serious matter with regard to the President. So yeah, we are very much open to investments precisely because this is energy. And it takes so much investment to make it happen.
Thank you. Ray, do you want to say anything, any comments?
You know, we're all in the private sector, so we do all share the need for government support. And I'm not talking about financial support, but really government coming up with the right policies, and when the right policies are in place, of implementing them. In the sector that we're in, I think it's important for the government, and I would say principally the DOE and the ERC, to make sure that the policies and the laws are implemented. All stakeholders should be held to account for their respective duties and obligations under the law. We all know that there are constraints within the entire ecosystem. And principally, I think, as alluded to earlier, there is really significant transmission constraint. And that has to be solved because, you know, we can keep, you know, there could be a lot of interest to build plants, but if the transmission is constrained, then that power is not going to be delivered to where it should go. And that today is a huge, significant problem. Not to mention also that we want to promote renewable energy, but renewables being intermittent power or energy, they require actually reserves to be in place, or basically reactive power. So where is the reactive power reserves? There are none. So you've imposed the RPS on the utilities, so we are forced if we don't, we basically can suffer criminal and other penalties. But for RPS to be successful, which relies on renewables, these renewable plants have to be built. And the grid has to be ready for these renewables to come in. So it's a structural issue for me that we already know who the stakeholders are, and the roles and responsibilities of each stakeholder is very clear under the law and the regulations. So government should actually be more forceful in implementing those rules and regulations.
Thank you, Ray. I guess just a bit to add. I mean, to be fair, talking about permits, and there are agencies not necessarily always within the Department of Energy's control, NCIP, for example, and others. And we can only imagine how difficult it is to rein that in. But I guess with this, with the current laws that we have, and you alluded to the number of laws that we have, a lot of laws, maybe in a spirit of proactive engagement, maybe the private sector, and it's one of the things put in the recommendations, try to really sit down. I know that in AmCham we've talked about, you know, trying to gauge whether the anti-red tape law, whether it actually works where you have issues, with the intention, for example, of flagging it and saying this is how it can be improved. So maybe that's a potential takeaway the Department of Energy can have, so that, you know, we don't get bogged down in terms of the processes, because at the end of the day, time is of the essence. We are happily growing, the economy is growing, and yet at some point maybe the increase in installed capacity or even available capacity will not catch up. A second point is reserves, right? It's good that we have this discussion about reserves. In fact, on the other hand, too much reserves is also not good. There's an economic cost to too much reserves. And the paper cites that Singapore is about 48% reserves, right? Surplus. You know, you have Malaysia is about 38%. In fact, Malaysia is trying to ratchet down some of the power projects. On the other hand, it could also be misleading because, let's say, other countries like Indonesia has about 27, 28%, and Thailand is 55%. But because of transmission issues, Indonesia has 17,000 islands. We have about 7,000. So it's not a simple calculus of, oh, you just add capacity. I think there has to be a very thoughtful way to approach maximizing your capacity that goes in step with increasing the reliability and the redundancy of your transmission network. That goes to the comments of, I guess, that pervades all. So those are really the 2 points that really stick in my mind. We're lucky so far that over the course of the summer, we've not seen any major issues. But there is a cost there somewhere, and other countries are feeling the same. It doesn't mean that the Vietnams of the world are immune from these issues. It's just that we have a market that's unique in the region, that the private sector can actively engage with government and try to harness the efficiencies. So hopefully the policies that you've enumerated, Undersecretary, and some of the things that we've put out there could be acted upon. Time's up for us, but may I just ask if any of the panel members would like to just give one last parting message or shot?
Okay, let me start. For many of the investors here, actually, it's not grim in the sense that there is retail competition access. Of course, I think we could do better in accelerating retail competition access so that there's more choice for consumers. But having said that, for many of you who operate factories and are in industry, there is already open access for you guys, and you can actually bid out your requirements. And I think we're all here very active in the competition for delivering low-cost electricity to industry. And so I think that we already see how industry has reacted, in the sense that industry, the moment they qualify for being able to acquire their own requirements for electricity, they've taken advantage of that method of purchasing power. So as a last comment, it will be good to see us accelerate that so that the choice goes to the consumer level.
Yeah, just I guess I said so much already about government. The concept of efficiency in government operations is not new. And I can say that because I came from government, and Jokot came from government as well. And I see one of my idols, Secretary De Lima, who was given that recognition by AmCham. She has shown also efficiency in government. So it's not a novel concept. I think government can really be more efficient so that we can build more power plants.
I'll give the last chance for it to say something at the end. But for, again, I've said a lot of things already, but for Avoid This Power, I think we're here to really support the country in terms of meeting the demand. But it's not just really just putting a power plant. We always have to consider the fuel technology, when to put it, the size, and where to put it, given the grid situation in the country. And well, we are here to support the investors, as Gail said, that are here through open access. Hopefully the threshold gets pushed down further from where it is today, so that more entities can actually participate. And as I said, this is just one of the good things that came out of EPIRA, and I think we are excited to see more.
Well, for us, for Meralco and for myself, I think first is EPIRA. EPIRA is a good law, and so it should be fully implemented. I think there has been debate of whether EPIRA is deficient, but it is good law. It benefits the consumers a lot, actually, and we should fully implement it. So the ARCOA, which is part of EPIRA, has to be fully implemented. I understand that the DOE is going to come up with a policy already to implement the 750 kilowatts up to 999 kilowatts. That's very good for us. Believe it or not, I mean, yes, we do have captive customers, but ARCOA is good. I am a consumer. I should be able to buy my power also from from GenCos. The second actually is government action. I think we need government to act faster in keeping with the times. I think developments arise very fast, and oftentimes we feel that government is not as proactive, it's more reactive, and that actually hinders growth and sends actually a wrong signal to investors. And the third really is for government to look at the structural issues that plagues the industry, especially when when stakeholders do not step up and basically fulfill their responsibilities under the law. I mean, all of those have to be put in place by government, and that's why we look to the DOE and even the ERC for basically to ensure and to enforce basically this compliance within the industry.
Thank you, Ray. And maybe last words from Yusek.
Now, without divulging anything confidential that happens in the cabinet meetings, suffice it to say that all of these issues, which are very big issues, like for example the transmission constraints, are taken up at the highest of levels. And rest assured that this has already caught the attention of our president. And he will act on it. When the public interest is at stake, rest assured, he takes very, very serious action on these types of things.
Thank you very much. Oh, sorry. Entertained question. Yeah.
Yes, I thought we would not have time for a question, and maybe we don't, but I want to ask this question. We've got to think out of the box here. You talked about being efficient. There are two ways to be efficient. One is to get more fuel, and the other one is to make good use of the fuel, correct? This question I have to address to my friend Yusek Posadas. You see, fuel, if you put in CMT, coconut methyl ester, it has been shown that the price of fuel will go up, but the benefit will be much more than the input, and therefore all this talk about people getting scared of doing this because it's inflationary is ill-advised. It's like a plant, you give fertilizer, it's more expensive, but if the output is 10 times more, you must put it in, and it should be deflationary. I must raise this to you because we are in a country which has coconut farmers who are suffering. And other countries have it 15, 20%. We are supposed to be 5%. We're still at 2% after all this time. And I've been there, and they keep on saying me, we don't want the price of fuel to go up. For God's sake, it is not inflationary. It is deflationary, if you know economics. It is deflationary. So, Mr. Posadas, I'm now giving it to the public. You have never disagreed that this study is wrong. You've always agreed that if you put in CMT, the output is much more than additional cost. But you said that truck drivers might get angry, people would say it's inflation. Sir, I now ask you in public, if it is more economical and more efficient to do this, and if in addition it will help our coconut farmers get out of poverty, in view of everybody here, would you like to now say that you will consider it? Because in the past you have told me not to consider it. Mr. Posadas, my friend, can you answer that question? Can you please consider it where other countries go to 20%, we're still at 2%? And the one I've heard all the time is you're afraid of the inflation and rumors of the truck drivers, when in fact we are not in a country that is populist, we're in a country that is supposed to be rational and economic. So Mr. Posadas, pagbigyan po ninyo ako, would you please consider this now?
In fact, I agree with you.
Wow.
there's no argument, because really it's more efficient if you use the CME in the diesel engine because of the lubricative characteristic that it improves on the operation of the diesel combustion engine. So I agree with you, it's more efficient. Now, the issue is, in fact, that is what I told the former Secretary of Agriculture. The issue really is how do we ensure that the benefits goes to the coconut farmer and not for the CME supplier? That's the whole issue. I agree with you. We want to help the farmer. But what happens? This is what happens. When the copra was at 40 per kilo, the CME was at 80. When the copra went down to 20, the CME stood at 80. So the issue is the benefit is going to the CME supplier. So that's why I told the Secretary of Agriculture, the former one, Mr. Secretary, don't we want to help the farmer? And he said, yes. Now please tell us if we improve, we agree with increasing the CME from 2 to 5. How do you ensure that that benefit goes to the farmer? He says, wait, I have to work it out.
Thank you.
Tell us. You tell us.
I will not take any more time, but those are two separate questions. The first question is it more efficient or not? Whoever gets the benefit, we must do what is more efficient, therefore we must do it. As for the second one, I, sir, am with the farmers, and we can fight that out. But that's a second topic. Let us do that. But we cannot do that unless we do the first. And let's just keep ourselves to economics. If it's economic correct, do it. Sir, I will follow you. Regarding the second one, let me handle that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, a question over there. Mirna.
Yeah, I have a question. Actually, this is about fuel in the power sector. Recently, there's a news that Malampaya is being sold, the stake of Chevron is being sold to Udena Corporation of Dennis Uy. The missing middle there actually is who is the partner of Dennis Uy, if ever. My only question is, number one, because this is implication about energy security. That's number one, because it will fuel the power sector now and in the future. What is the assurance from government that the partner who will be coming in is not China and that the Philippines is not being sold to China? So that's a question to the government. My second question is about CSP, because one of the big question mark actually is you have 33,000 of indicative capacity. So that's not a committed investment. How do you have that concretized into committed investment with all the questions about what should be the economics between greenfield and brownfield in the CSP process? So those two questions. And Amcham might want to answer the question on Chevron as well.
What was the first question again?
The sale of Chevron on Malampaya stake. What is the assurance that the partner coming in is not Chinese and it does not have implications on sovereignty of the country?
Yeah, you're now referring to this sale of the stake of Chevron to
Udena.
to the company
Of Dennis Uy.
yeah. And you are asking, what was the question?
What are the assurances that there are safeguards from government that the partner that will come in, the partner of Dennis Uy, is not a Chinese company, or in the process, we are not being taken over by a Chinese company in the future?
Well, these are very private transactions. I mean,
No, it's energy security.
but
I asked
let
that
me-
question as a Filipino.
no, yeah, you're asking it as a Filipino. I'm also a Filipino, but in any case, because I also sit in the board of PNOC, and one of the things that I have espoused is that very much similar to how it was done when the consortium, the Malampaya consortium was started. PNOC should be involved when there's already a discovery. In other words, very similar to the Chevron share that is now taken over. So in other words, one good candidate for a shareholder is PNOC itself, government. Because really, it's something that's already there. Because the issue really in energy resource development is exploration is really the high risk and high investment space. Whereas when there is already a discovery, the risk is lower and there's more assurance of investments being returned. And therefore, in answer to your question, how do we ensure that there is no Chinese participant? Hindi natin, palagi ko, hindi ko masasagot yun. But I'm telling you that a good candidate is PNOC itself. So I think that's something that I can answer from the part of government.
May I help Yusek Posadas phone a friend? No, I think, and because I'm familiar with Malampaya, because I've worked with Chevron Malampaya, no? I think as probably everyone knows, the Malampaya project is a consortium of 3 parties, Shell, Chevron, and PNOC, EC, Exploration Corporation. The operator is Shell. So to protect that project and ensure that it complies with Presidential Decree number 87, Shell must be strictly monitored in terms of implementing the service contract. So that ensures that we continue to have control of the project. So I think that's food for thought for the government. We will not lose the interest because anyway what was sold more or less is an economic interest, no? Because Shell continues to be the operator. Now it becomes a different question if Shell sells it, no? And that I cannot answer for Yusek Posadas.
The second question, CSP.
What
Can you
about-
repeat, Myrna?
Can you please repeat? Okay. Yeah, well, basically this is how it goes. A DU makes a projection, maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 years forward. And in that projection, of course, it is there, they will have to see where is the gap between the procured supply, or the supply procurement, and the demand that within their franchise area. Sa kanila yun eh. So, in fact, it is also their planning of how they will allocate the base load, mid-merit, and peaking categories for that particular space that they see, or the gap, capacity gap that they would need. So the issue really is how do you make the playing field equal, even. So the view that, well, of course, this is now, because we still have to, what do you call that, stabilize the position, is that, well, my particular view is that for 5 years, of course, you can allow everybody to come in. 5 years, 5 years forward, you allow everybody to come in. But for the 6th to the 10th, I don't think a power plant can be built earlier than that. So you allow all of those that can compete within that period. So you have the likes of greenfields, you have the likes of merchant plants that are not as old. Because the issue really is the age, as a good president from Meralco said. So you allow, and the third category is well, this is when we have reserve market already. Those reserve plants that are, well, again, not that old, can also compete. So in other words, we open it up to reasonably equal playing field. So that's the whole intention. Now, for the 6 to 10, I guess, lahat yun, greenfield, lahat yun, palagay ko eh. Or 15 to 20, again. So that's really how one reasonable person would look at it. Diba? Yeah, in fact, I have asked our Electric Power Industry Management Bureau and their supervising USEX and ASEX to please accelerate the reserve market, because that's really one space that can increase the supply. Because again, you have to understand that competitive selection process can only work when there is sufficient supply. That's basic. How can you have competitive selection process? Eh, kulang. Eh, that's a no-brainer. Huh?
Okay, I think we've extended. I hope everybody generated a lot of insight from this panel. Thank you, gentlemen, for your insights, and thank you very much. Good afternoon.
There you have it. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for our panel on the challenges in the power sector. May we please request that you stay on stage for a quick photo opportunity. While the speakers are having their photos on stage, may we remind the audience who may still have other questions to send them to forum@arangkadaphilippines.com. At this point, may we also please request that you complete and submit the evaluation forms that were placed on your seats and give these back to the registration counter at the ground floor after today's session. Your feedback is very important to us.